celebrate Christmas with John Williams and the Boston Pops Orchestra, and special guests Ed Asner and soprano Barbara Hendricks with the Tanglewood Festival Chorus. And a song or two from our very special guests. The American Boy Choir. And Christmas magic from Landis & Company. So throw another log on the fire and join us for Christmas at Pops.
Christmas at Pops, Monday night at 8 on Channel 2. Happy Hanukkah from all of us at Channel 2. The 10 o'clock news is closed captioned for our hearing-impaired viewers. We are grateful to Dunkin' Donuts and Bull Worldwide Information Systems for making this important service possible.
I'm Carmen Fields. Tonight on the 10 o'clock news, dozens of whales are stranded on a beach in Hyannis, and hundreds of helping hands try desperately to save them. Scheme Z. Some folks like it, others don't, especially if you live next door to what could be an 11-story highway structure. Also tonight, another young black man is dead, stabbed by another black youth. Our guests on the grim realities facing black men in America will be Dr. Alvin Poussant of Harvard University and State Representative Byron Rushing.
The 10 o'clock news is made possible by your contribution and by grants from Nimrod Press, printers and engravers. From New England Telephone, 30,000 people serving New England's communications needs for more than 100 years. And from Shawmut, providers of financial services at more than 200 locations across Massachusetts.
Volunteers and whale researchers are struggling tonight to save at least some of the 54 pilot whales that ran aground on a Hyannisport beach this morning. David Boeri reports.
Late this afternoon, a beautiful sunset over a desperate scene on the beach of Squaw Island, Hyannisport. The pilot whale swam ashore sometime before 10 this morning, while the tide was still ebbing. Stuck on the flats, exposed to the cold air on the outside while overheating internally, and crushed by their own weight out of water, their only chance was high tide and human help.
Can somebody put this in the bucket? In the bucket of the...
A team of volunteers, researchers, and rescuers dragged some of the whales back into the water, and at least 2 smaller whales were lifted into a truck and taken to the New England Aquarium for treatment. Most of the stranded whales are females. Pilot whales grow up to 20 feet long and weigh as much as 3,000 pounds. And why they beach themselves is anyone's guess.
The number of theories on why animals beach is equal to the number of animals on the beach today. You know, people have mentioned the tides from last week. You just don't know.
These strandings are an old story, and the population of pilot whales is large and healthy. But each new stranding brings an army of people determined to save the whales against long odds in a natural, if heart-wrenching, phenomenon.
You know, if we save one, it's better than having them all die.
We're just moments from high tide, and most of the animals are still on the beach. This is the last chance for them. It's a long shot. From the thrashing whales on the beach, researchers collected blood samples in search of some common thread to explain the stranding. There was a supply of sodium pentothal to kill the most injured whales, but 8 hours after the animals beached themselves, the rescuers were using it sparingly. It's been judged that none of them are suffering so badly that they should be put down?
Apparently not at this time. Our scientists are working and studying the animals, and apparently they feel that there are other options available to them.
If they're struggling, the ones on the beach are...
Oh, they're gone.
They're gone.
They're gone.
Out in the water, rescuers were holding 9 whales, keeping their blowholes above water.
3 relatively young animals and 6 sort of moderately aged animals. I'd say they're all in relatively good condition, although the 2 of the older ones look like they're still struggling. But they're not ready to go yet.
But the outlook for these whales isn't good either. There are sandbars, and in the past, whales that are dragged out into water and released generally swim back onto the beach again. The best chance may be for the few young whales that rescuers lifted up onto stretchers. 4 years ago, a team of rescuers saved 3 young pilot whales by transporting them to the New England Aquarium and later released them back into the sea. Daylight will show how many died in spite of these efforts. For the 10 o'clock news, I'm David Bowery.
And now Scheme Z. It's an obscure name for a proposal that is anything but low-key. Just the mention of Scheme Z is enough to anger some Charlestown residents who fear that if the design plan is approved, the state will replace one big green traffic monster with an even bigger, more fearsome one. Marcus Jones reports.
In some ways, it's like the biblical David battling the mighty Goliath. Dan King and his Charlestown neighbors are battling the state. They're trying to stop the construction of this proposed Scheme Z interchange, which is supposed to connect Charlestown and points north and south with the new central artery in Third Harbor Tunnel. The only thing different about this story is that the mighty Goliath is winning.
Well, basically, what we have here is the state coming into our neighborhood and building the world's highest density highway interchange. Scheme Z, that is what most people know it as, will consist of 16 lanes crossing the Charles River here behind us. Will rise to a height of 11 stories tall. It will contain 40,000 feet of highway lane, nearly 8 miles of highway lane. It will be the highest density highway interchange in the world.
As president of Citizens for a Livable Charlestown, King is leading the charge against Scheme Z. He and his organization are hoping to convince the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, John DeVillers, to reject the massive loop-de-loop Scheme Z design in favor of a less objectionable, less bulky alternative.
There are other alternatives that could combine a tunnel element, that could use some viaduct, some elevated structure that would certainly be acceptable to the Charlestown community.
King, whose brand new home on Washington Street provides him a front row view of the central artery construction, believes state transportation officials, who are pushing the hardest for Scheme Z, are not playing by their own rules. He says traffic flow problems are being overlooked, and proposals for noise reduction, which include building a wall at one end of King's neighborhood, raising the berm behind King's house, and permanently sealing the windows on these buildings a block away from King's home, border on the ridiculous.
Basically, the state will tell you that they've examined 31 plans and that this is the best they can do. If this is the best they can do, I think it's not a reason to build it. I think it's a reason for the taxpayers to ask for their money back.
Secretary DeVillers is scheduled to issue his environmental recommendations on the artery's Charles River crossing within the next few weeks. He says he is keeping an open mind about the project, but Dan King still has his doubts.
So that it appears that our concerns really aren't being addressed. And one of our basic concerns and one of our first calls is for an independent environmental analysis of this process, somebody outside the state.
Tomorrow night, in part 2 of our series on the Scheme Z interchange, we will consider the role of the state's Environmental Affairs Department in this controversy, and we will hear whether or not those opposed to the plan still have reason to hope that Scheme Z will not be implemented.
Is there any chance that your final review of the artery tunnel project will recommend anything other than the Scheme Z interchange?
Yes.
For the 10 o'clock news, I'm Marcus Jones.
The first step toward an enhanced 911 emergency calling system came today when Governor Michael Dukakis signed a new bill into law. The bill authorizes the New England Telephone Company to charge residential customers who make more than 10 calls a month to directory assistance. The charges are supposed to pay for the enhanced system for summoning police, firefighters, or ambulance help. E911, as it is known, will not be fully in place for 5 years. Phase 1 should be installed in about 18 months. When in place, the new system will display the address of a caller on a computer screen. That will save precious minutes for people in distress who might be unable to speak or too excited to give specific information. The 34-cent charge for directory assistance calls will begin in about 3 months. While he was campaigning for governor, William Weld promised to trim the fat in state government. Now that he's elected, Weld's being pressured to hold back some of his planned cuts. Today, consumer advocates tried to convince the governor-elect to keep the Consumer Affairs Cabinet post. Meg Valancourt has more.
I believe the government should do a very few things, but do them very well.
When William Weld won the governor's race, he promised to reduce the size and scope of state government. Now, a month later, he's creating his new cabinet, a process that involves not only picking the right people, but selecting which posts to fill. And that means a public struggle with groups who want to protect their interests from further cuts. Today, it was consumer advocates' turn to press their case.
This is to underscore our message to Governor-elect Weld. Everyone needs consumer protection, even Santa.
These activists want Weld to keep consumer affairs as a cabinet post. At the State House today, they argued the work of consumer affairs is well worth the cost.
We're not talking about a budget buster agency here, but rather a dozen dedicated people who do all the consumer investigations and education and other health services, including the 2 very successful lemon law programs, at a cost of less than 10 cents per person per year.
Good afternoon, Consumer Affairs.
The State Office of Consumer Affairs is one of the smallest secretariats, yet it's responsible for everything from insurance to the lemon law. The current cabinet secretary, Marianne Walsh, inherited the office from Paula Gold, who left state government to work for a utility. In a bid to save money and reduce the state's payroll, Consumer Affairs swallowed another cabinet post, the Office of Energy, late last year. Recently, legislators began talking about saving even more money by eliminating consumer affairs as well. But today, consumer advocates said that would be a big mistake.
Everyone has had a car problem, a home improvement or apartment problem, or a purchase that didn't turn out right, didn't turn out as they expected. And I would guess that, frankly, most of us would rather turn to a government agency than pay a lawyer a high fee for his or her advice.
This afternoon's press conference was an unusual alliance. Joining several nonprofit groups were a handful of high-profile Massachusetts companies, all trying to protect the state's Consumer Affairs Office from the axe. Today, a spokesman for Polaroid acknowledged that the public might be surprised to see big corporations making a plea for consumer protection, but...
If you think about it, though, it makes very good sense. When a seller rips someone off, there are 2 victims. Obviously, the consumer loses, but so does the honest business person who may have lost a sale.
Governor-elect Weld refused to comment on his plans for the consumer cabinet post today. However, he campaigned on a promise of downsizing state government. And in the past, he has suggested that the Consumer Affairs Department could be included under the Secretariat of Economic Affairs. In any case, it'll soon become clear just how much restructuring of state government Weld intends to do. On Thursday, he'll announce 2 to 4 new members of his cabinet. For the 10 o'clock news, I'm Meg Valancourt.
If there was too much nip in the air for you today, just remember, last year at this time, we were in the midst of the coldest December on record. In Boston tonight, clouds are on the increase and the temperatures are headed down to the mid-20s. Tomorrow, the clouds stick around and the highs for the day should reach the mid-40s. Tomorrow night will be partly cloudy. Lows will be around the freezing mark. And Thursday looks to be breezy and mild with a chance of showers. Highs will be up near 55 degrees. Murder found its way to Boston again today for the 140th time this year. Death claimed 17-year-old Kingsley Allen today in the hallway of Boston High School. He was stabbed. Police arrested his 18-year-old classmate, Robert Reynolds. He's scheduled to be arraigned on murder charges tomorrow morning. In the wake of the crime, some members of the Boston School Committee are calling for metal detectors to be installed in public schools. That may solve a small piece of what is now generally acknowledged nationally as a crisis for black males. Homicide and suicide rates Cancer, heart disease, and school dropout rates are at an all-time high. Here to help us grapple with statistics blossoming in front of our very eyes are State Representative Byron Rushing, who is also a historian currently participating in a series of think tanks on the black male hosted by Morehouse College in Atlanta, and Dr. Alvin Poussaint, a psychiatrist affiliated with the Judge Baker Guidance Center, Child Guidance Center, and Harvard Medical School. He's also author of a book called Why Blacks Kill Blacks. That book was written in 1972, Dr. Poussaint. I'm wondering if the root of this crisis, or the roots are is there any similarity between what you were finding then and now?
I think there are a lot of similarities. Back in 1972, black-on-black homicide was the second leading cause of death. Now, of course, it's the leading cause of death among young black males, and the rate is going up and up and up to staggering degrees. I think the roots of it are the same. I think it's basically there's a fundamental self-image, self-hate, self-esteem problem, and all of these kids are feeling of powerlessness. And I mean by self-hate, I mean kind of self-disrespect, and disrespect for other blacks as well, which gets projected onto each other, so it makes it easier to kill. I think that if the community, people in the community, these kids like themselves, they wouldn't want to kill each other. I think also having a gun and a weapon with all the kind of propaganda we get from the media gives all these kids a sense of power. That is, they shoot somebody, that's a heck of a lot of power to take someone out. And I think that's the way a lot of them think of it, particularly since they're fed with all this media and movie violence, with people kind of getting ahead and riding into the sunset. After a while, they don't know the difference between good or bad. Now, the thing that I think is a little bit different, I felt that negative feelings about being black were at the core of it before. Now, I still think that's there, but I think that now the poverty factor is very, very powerful. The poverty, and also more of an anti-social attitude, and with not enough social supports. That is, I think the family in the black community is not as strong as it was back in 1972. There's all kinds of indications of breakdown. There are more single-parent households kind of mired in poverty, and all of this contributes, I think, to the problem. And now the ready availability of handguns all over the place, which if you shoot the bullet, you can't retract it. You know, it goes, someone's dead.
But Representative Rushing, at the same time, black people have survived slavery and the promise of Reconstruction and underemployment and unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. As a historian, I'm curious what you see that may be unique about this time that makes us seem to be turning on one another in such viciousness.
I think the first thing, though, and we have to set this in context, and that is that most black people are not attempting to kill other black people. So most black people believe that that we should not be engaged in such antisocial, destructive, horrendous behavior. And although we are seeing more of it, it is still the minority of black people who are doing it. I think that one of the problems that we have in the community is that we didn't read Al Poussaint's book in 1972. And I take that, and I mean that very seriously. See, certainly the leadership in the black community, felt it was not a good thing in the 60s and into early 70s to talk about a problem that was so destructive internally. And we have to, I think, move beyond that to talking about what are the reasons that this is happening. The two most difficult things, I don't know about a historian, but certainly as an elected official, the two most difficult things for me to say in the answer to any question is, I don't know, and it's going to take a long time. We don't know all the answers to this one. We have some of the pieces, but one thing we are sure of, it's going to take a long time, because what we are talking about is changing everyone's attitude about respect for each other. And that means the adults, and it means the young people who in lots of ways are emulating the adults.
Why aren't we seeing this same kind of violence statistic around black females? I mean, black females are still going to college in higher numbers. The dropout rates are not.
Well, I think the violence rate is probably up some, but nowhere near what's going on with males. And black females are succeeding better than black males. There are a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, males tend to be more violent anyway, and for cultural reasons and maybe even some biological factors. I think, too, that the system is set up and geared a little bit better to females. That is, going to school, reading and writing is considered a feminine activity, so that females can fit into that much more easily. For black male children in the inner city, frequently that's seen as non-masculine. They call each other sissies. They put each other down. They're looking for ways to establish their manhood and being macho. And in fact, being violent is one of the ways I think that they do that.
While we're on the schools and in the context of today's incident and what happens to the schools in Milwaukee, what some consider a very bold experiment in taking preteen black males and isolating them or putting them in same-sex schools, a bold experiment or on the route to folly? Is that something worth thinking about here, Representative?
Well, I don't think that that is going to answer the question of violence. See, I think that one of the ways that we're going to reduce the violence in the community is to increase black people's, and especially young black men's, feeling of power in legitimate ways, in constructive ways, that they have to feel that they are in control of their situation. If they get to choose the school, you see, if they get to run the school, see, if they get to be able to do that kind of thing, if they are able to say, yes, this is mine and I can change it. I want this to happen, and I use my skills to in that direction, and things change because of that, then they are more empowered. And I think that really is the key here. Not the artificial, arbitrary situation that you put them in, but do they feel empowered by the event?
The Milwaukee concept worth thinking about here, Dr.
Well, I think it's worth thinking about. First of all, the Milwaukee situation, the schools are already segregated, so that what they're really doing is making the same gender schools. And I think it's worth a try. Cooperative kinds of educational approaches, gearing the curriculum without the distractions of females, and that's not to say females, but I mean frequently a lot of the violence in the high schools in particular is focused around male-female relationships, so that we have to consider that when thinking about controlling some of the violence. Also, without the competition around trying to show manhood in relationship to females, and also trying to gear and establish a curriculum that might meet the needs of the black male, that might become obscured in a mixed sex situation. Do you know what I mean? But the final thing I want to say around the violence and the children is that we still have to socialize the children right. That is, the parents still from day one have to provide for those kids all the kinds of things that will establish their self-esteem, that have nothing to do specifically with race.
Well, thank you very much. Something we'll be hearing more about in the days to come, unfortunately. Dr. Alvin Poussaint, Representative Byron Rushing, thank you very much for being with us. Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze is urging the Bush administration to find, quote, a sensible way out of the Persian Gulf crisis. The suggestion came after the foreign minister told U.S. Secretary of State James Baker that the Soviet Union will not participate in any military action against Iraq. He's in Houston for wide-ranging talks, among them an attempt to complete an arms reduction treaty. Shevardnadze's next courtesy call is on Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir on Thursday. In Washington today, Shamir and President Bush attempted to reconcile what has been a year-long trial separation in their longtime common-law partnership. Mike McKee reports from Washington.
Apparently, the president no longer has to worry about Americans trapped in Iraq and Kuwait. Diplomatic officials say just 14 U.S. citizens left on the latest charter flights from Baghdad.
Based on the evidence of today's flight, we believe that all Americans who wish to depart will have done so.
Since August 2nd, according to the State Department, some 2,500 Americans have been evacuated from Iraq and Kuwait. Another 800 have escaped. Approximately 510 have decided to remain, mostly those with dual citizenship or relatives in one of those countries. Just to make sure, however, one more flight will be made on Thursday to pick up any who change their minds. It will also carry out the U.S. diplomats who've been holding out in the Kuwait City embassy for the past few months. Meanwhile, Mr. Bush has also dealt with another worry, winning a pledge from Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir that Israel will continue to stay out of the Iraq crisis. The Israelis have been keeping a low profile at the administration's request, despite their fears that a diplomatic solution would leave their Arab neighbors stronger and more united. In exchange for his country's continued cooperation, Shamir says the president promised to look out for Israel's interests.
I trust the president of what he said. He said it several times, and he said it to me now again, that there will not be any deal at the expense of Israel.
That would include a veto of any UN resolution tying an Iraqi withdrawal to a Middle East peace conference or to existing UN resolutions calling for Israel to give up its occupied territories. The day's developments have strengthened the president's hand. With the hostages out of the way, the option to use force becomes easier. With the Israelis in line, the option appears to be the president's alone. Mike McKee at the White House.
In South Africa, in the last few months, more than 1,000 people have died fighting in Johannesburg's black townships. Today in Thokoza Township, another 37 people were killed, and the leaders of the two warring factions, Nelson Mandela of the African National Congress and Zulu chief Gacha Buthelezi, still haven't agreed to talk to each other about ending the violence. Mike Hanna has more.
After an easy peace that lasted less than a week, Thokoza Township has once again erupted. Police say this morning's violence was of such intensity that security forces already deployed on the ground were unable to suppress it. And from mid-morning, police reinforcements backed up by military units and air support began to move in. Cordons were set up around the township in a bid to prevent the violence from spreading to other areas. But Law and Order Minister Adrian Vlok has now made clear that no amount of security action will effectively end the violence if, in his words, people wanted to kill each other on the scale already experienced. As in last week's violence, the warring sides on the ground hold each other responsible. Followers of the Zulu-based Inkatha movement claim they were responding to attack from predominantly Xhosa-speaking supporters of the African National Congress. ANC members in the township are adamant they were the target of unprovoked attack by Inkatha. ANC leader Nelson Mandela and Inkatha head Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi have been invited to tour the area tomorrow in a peace bid by the South African Council of Churches. Council argues that only a joint public appeal by leaders can end the violence.
Nelson Mandela accepted the invitation and will be in Thokoza tomorrow. Chief Buthelezi said he couldn't accept on such short notice, but that he would make his own trip to Thokoza soon. In Liberia, all the news has been about the three sides fighting a civil war. There is a fourth side, though. It's the children, and they're dying of starvation because of the war. There is only a small amount of food for sale, and few people can afford to buy it. And Liberia's capital, Monrovia, has been without electricity, running water, and regular food supplies for 6 months. A United Nations representative says that relief workers are starting to arrive with food. They hope to be able to feed 25,000 children. But he adds that there are 90,000 children in Monrovia alone who need help. And finally, a programming note before we say goodnight. Tomorrow night you can catch the 10 o'clock news on Channel 2 at 11 o'clock. We will not be on Channel 44 at all tomorrow night. And that's our news. I'm Carmen Fields. Good night.
The 10 o'clock news is made possible by your contribution and by grants from Nimrod Press, printers and engravers. From New England Telephone, 30,000 people serving New England's communications needs for more than 100 years. And from Shawmut, providers of financial services at more than 200 locations across Massachusetts.
America from all of us at Channel 2.